This is CheloniaCast, episode 37. Today we're joined by Gabriel Jorgewich-Cohen, who is currently a PhD student at the University of Zurich's Museum of Paleontology. We're really excited to talk to Gabriel today. He's done a lot of really interesting work, and we're going to focus a lot on one of his recent papers on sort of communication and evolution of communication in turtles. Some really interesting, groundbreaking stuff. So thanks for coming on, Gabriel, and we're excited to talk to you.
Thank you for inviting me. Exciting to be here.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess we like to start it off with one question that's kind of all the same, but it's interesting to hear everyone's different response. But what first got you interested in turtles and tortoises, and how'd you get into that path?
Oh, how not to get into that path, right? Like, they're so cool.
Right.
No,
yeah.
I mean, I guess I've been always obsessed about animals since I was a very small child, and I was always very interested, especially in fish and reptiles, amphibians. As a kid and as a teenager, I had many pets at my place, and I learned a bunch about these animals. Reading online and trying to care for them and breed them. And I decided to study biology in my bachelor's. During the bachelor's, I did some volunteer work. I did some short-term research on these groups, especially reptiles and amphibians. But most of my work until I started my PhD was focused on amphibians. I think also because they're very interesting, but they're more common. It's easy to find them, and it's not the case with every group of reptile.
Right.
And but I had pet turtles, and I was interested in giving them very good care. So I was always reading as much as I could, and I started realizing that there were so many knowledge gaps and some things that I could actually answer by just looking at my own pets, and I started going more and more into that direction, and I just think it's an amazing group to work with.
That's it's interesting that sort of from the you had him early on, and that love for him was developed kind of early. I'm curious too, because you said earlier that you're from Brazil originally and went to undergrad there and master's, I believe. But what brought you to the University of Zurich? That's kind of a big jump, right?
Yeah. Well, I guess maybe at least in the American perspective, this might be a bit strange because such a big country with many universities. And of course, Brazil is also a large country with many universities, but sometimes funding is an issue. And I think once you get the chance to apply to positions elsewhere where you can get access to different resources, and you get in touch with really great researchers, which of course we also have them in Brazil. That's an alternative. So it's not rare for people in many countries, not only Brazil, to apply for positions in elsewhere. And I just saw the opportunity. I applied for this scholarship that was granted by the Swiss government, and yeah, here I am.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's sort of different. Like in the United States, at least, it's not. I mean, people do obviously, but it's not as common to leave the country to go. But that makes a lot of sense. That there's sort of different dynamic. Well, I guess we could start. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
No, just to close the topic, I have several colleagues here, and most of them are not Swiss. So the international community is huge. Switzerland, especially international. But this is the case in every post-graduation in Europe, at least. And I don't know many Americans here. I think not as many come as people from other regions.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, in the future, there's certainly great resources all over the place, and it seems like that might be something where for upcoming students looking for opportunity, maybe consider stuff that's beyond sort of the confines of your national in the United States in particular. But yeah, I think maybe now we can sort of transition into the major topic for today, which is the sort of evolution of communication and sound production among, and this study you did was among all choanates. I think the pronunciation may be messed up there, but a lot of tetrapods essentially, and ancestors. But maybe you could just sort of give us kind of a rundown of why you chose to, like, what got you interested in that question. It's such an interesting thing, but where did that idea to study this first come from?
Well, I started the research focus on turtles. The idea of working with choanates generally came afterwards once I discovered that acoustic communication was widespread among turtles. So first of all, I went to different institutions like zoos and private collectors and other institutions in different countries, and I recorded as many turtle species as I could. And the idea was to have a good phylogenetic overview of the species. And in total, we recorded 50 different species from all families, and we discovered that they all make sounds. They all produce several sounds actually. And from there, we started making new questions. So because we discovered this opened to a new path of the research. So basically, we knew already before we started this research that there were some turtles that were able to communicate with sounds. So actually this paper we published is co-authored by Camila Ferrara, who's a Brazilian researcher in the Amazon. And she was the one publishing most of the papers showing that several different turtle species produce sounds. But the knowledge we had about this was sparse, and we just knew from something between 5 and 10 species that were able to communicate with sounds. And before, this was considered to be something rare and something that appeared in those species, but was not widespread among turtles. And once we discovered that it's actually not the case, that every turtle, all the species we recorded produce sounds. We never found one that didn't. We started questioning that these other lineages of animals, they are commonly also considered to be mute. So we just thought maybe we should go there and record them as well and check. And that's why we included some other animals in the paper, like the tuatara, the Sicilian, and the lungfish. And they also all produce sounds. And we focus the paper on choanates because this is tetrapods plus lungfish, right? And we recorded the lungfish because this is the sister taxa to tetrapods. And they also have lungs. They can also breathe air. So our hypothesis is that the mechanisms of sound production are they diverged during the evolutionary history of the lineages, but they come from the same evolutionary origin. And then we did not include ray finnet fishes because we know that they produce sounds in many different ways. So maybe this is not the same in an evolutionary perspective. And that's why it's focused on choanates and not, for example, vertebrates, although they do produce sounds as well.
Right. That there's a lot to unpack there, and it's a real great overview to it. But so I guess the first thing, because you'd mentioned, so your conclusion is that at sort of the choanate basal ancestor and the common ancestor, that whole group, that sound production was likely something that existed and then it radiated out and it changed and diversified, but it was always sort of something that existed. But prior to this analysis, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, no one had shown that before, and typically the answer to the question was the opposite, that it was something that was convergent and it had evolved multiple times. Like, is that right? And what were some of the lines of reasoning behind that conclusion as opposed to what you found?
Yeah, actually, there was only one paper that was published on like trying to answer exactly that question. And it was published in 2020, if I'm not mistaken, by a group in the US. And basically, they like, we used the same analysis they did. We actually used their database even, and their phylogenetic tree. But the difference between their work and ours is that we had new evidence about these lineages that were not known to make sound. So what happened in their research, in their paper, is that they were not on purpose. It's not to put their work down. This is definitely not the fact. The case. I think it was great research. It's just that they didn't have this information, so they were considering these animals to be non-vocal based on lack of information, not evidence of absence. Mm-hmm. If you know what I mean. And because of that, the reconstruction that they had was very different from ours. They basically concluded that the sounds made by mammals come from a different evolutionary origin than sounds made by birds and sounds made by frogs, for example. But if you include turtles in this context, this changes completely.
Right. It was sort of just an absence of data, and that negative was sort of coded in a way that it produced a tree where you had different results. That makes sense. But that sort of raises another question. I was sort of curious about this. I think you address it in the paper a bit, but for someone that's reading it, they may question, like, because you're looking really at sound production. How do you know if that's communication? Like, how are you determining that?
That's a great question, and it's for sure something that we need to investigate further. So, for example, there is a group here at the University of Zurich that works on acoustic communication of meerkats, and the principal investigator of this group started this research over 30 years ago, and she has been studying these animals since then with a very large group of PhD students and postdocs and so on. They even have a colony of meerkats here in Zurich. And they still find new sounds. They still find new meanings to the sounds that they make. So like they have so much work on this, and there's still things to discover. And what I did in my research was to record over 50 different species that have never been recorded, and show that they have a bunch of different sounds. But I wasn't able to explain the meaning of each sound that each species produce. And this definitely needs to be investigated further. But we had an approach to try to infer the intentionality or the meaning associated to those sounds that they produce. So basically what we did was to record first only females, then only males, then couples together, then only juveniles, then juveniles with females, and so on and on. And try to see if there was any type of correlation between the sounds that they were making and the behavior they were displaying. So we had underwater cameras together with the hydrophone and so on. And some of the sounds that they produced were clearly associated to, for example, courtship behavior. So we can tell only males produce that sound. Like we never found this sound when we were recording only females or only juveniles and so on. Also, for example, there are some sounds that increase in number and frequency when you put animals together. So if you record them in isolation, they sometimes produce sounds, but just every once in a while together, they just don't stop, because this has a social meaning. So those were several different kinds of indications that those sounds had a reason. They have communicative meaning. It's not just a background or like a byproduct of other behaviors.
Right.
And I think also one other thing that I think is quite relevant, and this is not something we specify in the paper because also space is limited and so on, is that there are some species recorded that produce over 30 different types of sounds, which is insane. Like, we don't know any species of turtle, or like there are no descriptions of turtles with acoustic repertoires that big. And actually, if you read about birds and mammals, many species don't produce that many sounds. So it's actually not very.
That's really impressive, because one of the insects that is so well known for communicating with stridulation is the best beetle, right? And those only produce 17 sounds. 30 is a lot.
Yeah, no, it's a lot. And I think it's just not parsimonious to think that if they're producing 30 different types of sounds in different contexts, that this is just, right, randomly produced as any other behavior. It's just doesn't make sense.
Which species were you finding that, talking about the turtles in particular as a whole, sort of that's real interesting, and you had a lot of experience with the, I guess before we get into talking individual turtles and how they differed, maybe it'd be good to just where were these turtles that you were measuring?
So all this research, or most of this research, was made in captivity, because we had no reference of the kinds of sounds we were looking for. So if you go to the wild and you just randomly record them there, you're probably going to get sounds from other species that you also don't know are producing sounds. So we had to isolate these animals to do this research. And to do that, we went to several different institutions in 5 different countries, if I'm not mistaken. So I've been to places in Switzerland, in Austria, Germany, England, and Brazil. But also some of the species were recorded by some of my co-authors. So there are species from Belize, Australia. Yeah, I don't remember if there are other countries now.
But it's a large group. I mean, this was a collective effort for sure.
Yeah. It was a huge effort, but many animals are in zoos here. So I could go sometimes to a place and stay just for, I don't know, 2 weeks and record a bunch of them in that time frame. But yeah, it's definitely a collective work.
Right. That's really interesting. A lot of effort went into this for sure. When it comes to using the hydrophone, what was that like, and different, like taking that around? I mean, was it straightforward, or were there kind of issues with trying to do that?
Well, there are always issues, right? So many things you don't expect. And there's always a case where the hydrophone breaks, and then you have to find what broke and fix it. And sometimes you don't have the type of equipment that you need to fix it. The cameras break, and then the cameras fall, and then you cannot see anything in the camera because the water is so dirty. There is a lot of background noise because it's like, I don't know, you get to a place and you don't know what you're going to get. You just email people, you say, I know you have this collection of turtles, I need to record this and this and that species. And you get there, and then suddenly the enclosures are in the middle of the bird enclosure. So there are many parrots and other birds making a lot of sounds, and it's like it's hell. And then you have to negotiate. Can we move these turtles to another room? Can we do this? Can we do that? And then rules are different in different places. You have to be lucky to get people there willing to help. So yeah. And the hydrophone is actually not too big, so it's quite easy to bring it anywhere. It's like a tiny. I should have brought it here so I could show it to you. I don't have it with me, but it's like a small microphone that goes underwater. It has very long cable, so you have some flexibility with the distance you put your recorder from the pool, for example. The recorder I used is it's a professional music recorder, but you can buy it at any shop. So yeah, it's actually the equipment itself and the way of collecting data is quite simple. It's not like rocket science or anything. It's just that it's new. No one did it.
It's sort of weird to think. I mean, it was such an interesting question and kind of an open question, but in the fact, but I mean, we know so little. I think collectively that it sort of makes sense, but at the same time, it's like it's crazy. 2022. That's like the first time that it's been done. I mean, it just goes to show how much we have to learn.
Yeah.
So that's when it comes to sort of the individual turtles that you were monitoring. I mean, this was something that's real interesting, and for folks of our audience that are more turtle savvy, and that's kind of the primary interest, I'm sure going to want to hear about the differences among species. So like, what were some of I mean, how variable are we talking between the 50 turtles you measured, and what were some of the most unique ones where maybe you saw something you didn't expect to see? Or
yeah, well, it can actually vary a lot within a species. I was telling you that there are some that produce like over 30 different types of sound, so you get a bunch of different things only with that species. But there are some sounds that are quite similar in different lineages. They are not really that closely related. So for example, we have sounds, and maybe I can send you the link later, but it's also on the paper. There's a presentation where you can actually listen to every single sound from every species we recorded, so people can check it later. But there's, for example, sounds produced by the Hicati, the Dermatemes from Belize. Those were hatchlings, and if you compare the sounds produced by hatchlings of all the sea turtle species, they are actually quite similar. And there are some sounds like clicks, for example. They're quite widespread. Many species produce them. And some species produce more complex sounds that are like, it's a bit hard to describe, but it's like a high-pitched squeak, and you can find those in different lineages as well. So I find it interesting to think that there are some sounds that are very different, some that are very similar, and the number of different sounds actually vary a lot. And one thing that I've been thinking about for very long, since I started this actually, is that it's actually very hard for us to compare the sounds produced or the repertoires produced by different species, because and maybe I'm going into a too specific topic here. You can stop me at any time, but
no, we like this. This is what it's all about. Yeah.
But one issue here, and I have no clue how to solve this issue at the moment, is how to propose a homology hypothesis about those sounds. So to the ones that don't know, homology is referring to the same evolutionary origin, right? So like when we compare things, we have to be sure that what you're comparing apples to apples and not apples to bananas, right? And when they are producing those many sounds, it's a bit complicated to say, okay, this sound is a courtship sound. That sound is used for, I don't know, whatever else. Even if you know that, you cannot really say, okay, these are the same things. These sounds have the same evolutionary origin, so we can compare those among different species. This is not necessarily true, because function can also change during the evolutionary process, right? So the same sound produced by two different species during courtship are maybe not comparable. And then any inference that you make is based on a hypothesis that is highly limited, because you have like these huge differences of number of sounds and types of sounds and behaviors associated to those sounds, which makes it impossible to make like deeper comparisons. I don't know if I make myself clear or I just created a new problem.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about. Yeah, right. Among species, how are all the sounds you're hearing? How can you place them into context, and where are the similarities and differences? Right, that's sort of what you're saying.
Yeah, that too, for sure. But also it's just hard. Like I cannot decide, okay, those things are comparable. I don't know what is comparable.
You know, right? Yeah, it's when it's species specific. That's another thing that I'm curious about, right? If you've got species specific sounds, even if the sounds are similar, they could serve very different functions. And
exactly, that's exactly my point. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and I haven't done any. I mean, I haven't focused too much on this topic, and I haven't tried to do any fancy analysis on this, but I don't see any pattern that shows that some sounds are associated to specific lineages. So I don't think, for example, we could use sounds. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know, but based on what I have seen so far, it seems to me that we probably won't be able to use sounds as a taxonomic character for turtles, as it's done for many birds and frogs, for example. I don't know, and I would like to investigate further, and I hope some people do the same.
Yeah, that was something I was particularly curious with. Like, it's so complex. You think for cryptic species, like the one like alligator snapping turtles is sort of an example. I mean, they're not. I think you could consider them cryptic species. They're but similar in a lot of ways. And that was one where you showed it seemed like they were producing pretty high intensity sound. I mean, was that for the alligator snapping turtles? What was the situation with that?
I'm gonna twist your question a little bit, and I'm actually gonna talk more about the common snapping turtle. Because I was very, very much impressed by that species. With the alligator snapping turtle, I couldn't get a lot of information. We recorded it in captivity for very short periods of time, so I don't have much to say. But with the common snapping turtle, we recorded several animals in different contexts, and we actually got many more sounds than those we included in this paper. And I told you before that I finished my thesis now, and I'm about to defend my PhD, and I have other chapters on turtle acoustics. And in one of those, we described we have a bit broader description of the acoustic repertoire of the common snapping turtle. And this animal is insane. I find it very interesting because, they have this fame of being so aggressive and like they don't want to interact too much. They fight, but they actually have a lot to say, a lot of different things to say. So yeah, quite cool.
That's interesting. I'm in when I'm not at school in Athens, Georgia, I'm in Atlanta, and I've historically been in California, but I recently moved there. But so I've spent a lot of time looking for them in the wilderness. Ken's also in the area, so we go out and look for them a lot. They're really interesting turtles because you can find a lot of them in an area, but they're also in habitat that you wouldn't think is really conducive to communicating. Like when you kind of look at the results in context of captivity in the wild, how effective do you think communication would be in a wild setting? Like how well do those sounds travel?
Yeah, we definitely need to look further into that because, well, first of all, when the animal is in captivity, there is a limited set of situations to which it's exposed, right? So like there are several things that it's going to experience in the wild that it's definitely not going to experience in captivity. So I would expect the acoustic repertoire in captivity to be much more limited than the sounds that they produce in the wild. But we don't know much. There are just a couple of species that were recorded both in captivity and in the wild, like the South American river turtle or the Amazon river turtle. I don't know the popular name you prefer, but those turtles from the Podocnimis genus are the better studied so far, and they do produce a bunch of different sounds in the wild that they seem not to produce in captivity. And also, I think the kind of environment should influence in the wild. I mean, should influence the sounds that they produce. So, like, you can find several species of turtles are found in different kinds of environments, right? Like the common snapping turtle can be in ponds, lakes, rivers, and so on. And I would expect them to slightly change. Like they should probably have some amount of flexibility in the way they produce sounds to be more adequate to the environment they're living.
Mm-hmm. That's another good question. We can return back, I think, to the Podocnimis in a second. That would be interesting. But with the snap, like with turtles in general, we talked a lot about that they're producing sounds, but how are they actually doing this? They don't seem like they're really vocally oriented animals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wish I had an answer for your question. This is something I also investigated during my PhD. So far, there is one paper published on sound production in turtles, which was published in 2005, if I'm not mistaken, by a group of Italians who studied different species of testudo, the tortoises from Europe. And like we know that with the scientific community knew that tortoises make sounds for a very long time because they are inland and we can see them and they make very loud sounds when they are breathing. They stretch their neck, they open their mouth, and they're quite funny and so on. And in their paper, they conclude that turtles are only able to produce sounds if they have their necks stretched and their mouth open, and they have to put their tongues out. That's the only way, based on a lot of different aspects of the soft tissue and so on. But at that time, the scientific community didn't know that turtles can make underwater sounds. So we thought that only tortoises were vocal. And I think because of that, the conclusions they have are a bit biased in that sense. They only focus on that specific group of animals. But while recording this many aquatic species, I actually observed that they produce a bunch of different types of sounds, but they rarely do with their mouth open. It's like it's basically all the time with their mouth shut. And they have several movements in their neck. Sometimes they move their heads as well. It's a bit odd. I don't really know what is going on. And of course, it could be that the way sound is produced changed in different lineages of turtles. Like it happened in different lineages of tetrapods, for example. So birds have a special structure called syrinx that is, it works in a similar way as our larynx, but it's a completely new thing in the evolutionary history. And I would expect turtles to have not that extreme example as birds, but I would expect them to have differences as well. So I think this is something that should be investigated. And during my PhD, I did investigate this a little bit, and I did a whole research on the hyoid bones of turtles. So the hyoid is a bone that is part of the axial skeleton, and it's holding the larynx, and it also attaches to the tongue, and it has a lot of it has an important role in feeding, breathing, sound production, and so on in many species. So I did a comparative research looking at these bones in all turtle lineages, and there are several differences, but I wasn't able to point anything specific that correlates to the sound production in these animals. And I think I would only be able to make any inferences if I could look at soft tissue, or maybe do some I don't know, X-rays, like live X-rays, which is super complicated because they are underwater, and turtles don't produce sounds that often like birds do. So it would be very specific research. And of course, I didn't have the time and resources to do that in my PhD. So the answer, like I talked for an hour, but the answer is I don't know how they produce the sounds.
That's I mean, it's interesting. It opens up a whole different world of like, how are they actually generating those vocalizations? It's really fascinating. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of fascinating how diverse this topic is, and like it's a whole area of untouched water or untouched potential here, and there's so much to ask about it. There was another one on the sound profiles in the paper that I found kind of interesting. The Pelecheles, it looked like they were producing kind of a varied like intensity, and it looked different than the others. I don't know if those were also kind of strange, or what you think was going on there.
I thought those were, yeah, they were especially interesting because not specifically because of the sound types. There were some other turtles that produced similar sounds, but and these didn't have like a huge repertoire. They were using more or less the same sounds all the time. But the impressive thing about them was that they would not stop vocalizing. So they, depending on the species, they produce sounds like 1 or 2 sounds every 5 to 10 hours. It's like you have to be very patient to get any sound. But once we put those together and we started recording them, they were like birds. They wouldn't stop, one sound after the other. So I thought that could be a good model for studying turtle vocalization in future research, although they are super rare and hard to find. But
yeah, that's real interesting. So when you had them separate, they don't really communicate much, but it's only when you bring them together. So it's almost, yeah, it seems
well,
like
which is, I think it's like another evidence that this is used for communication, right? Like they're not doing it alone. Mm-hmm. If it would be just a secondary, like a consequence of another behavior, then they would probably do it all the time, right? I would guess.
Right. With yeah. Oh yeah. So captivity is another one where it's interesting. Like, I mean, you were measuring this in captivity, but and just thinking about how the repertoires of sound would change. Do you think captivity changes those from what they would be in the wild? Maybe we don't have the answers for this, but
I do not have the answer, but I would guess so, at least in some degree. but I think it would be cool to use those sounds made in captivity to at least start some, for example, playback experiments in the wild. Yeah, and actually, you were asking me about those soft shells, and well, considering that you're in the U.S., I wasn't able to record the American soft shell, the spiny soft shell, you call them, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I didn't record them, and based on the species I did record, I think soft shells generally produce a bunch of sounds. They're quite chatty compared to other lineages. So if I could recommend you to do something in this line of work, would be to try to record the spiny soft shells, and maybe start in captivity and then go to the wild and check. They're quite common, aren't they? Like, you can easily find them, I guess, in some regions at least.
So what species of soft shell have you tested with?
I recorded plenty of them. I recorded one species of every single genus except for Raphatus, which is like nearly impossible to find.
Yeah.
Right.
And the spiny soft shell.
That's awesome.
I have recordings of all the other ones. Not all species, but at least one in each genus.
Yeah, I'd be really interested to see how chatty Keitra are.
Yeah, no, they are. I'll tell you.
That's awesome.
Going
and,
back.
I was telling you.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
No, so just to finish that, I was telling you before that I have another chapter in my PhD that is also focused on turtle acoustics, where I describe the acoustic repertoire of snapping turtles, common snapping turtles in more detail. In this same paper, I also described the chitra.
Nice, awesome.
So yeah, a lot of information about those as well.
Yeah, the Apollon, the North American soft shells, that would make an interesting model system, because you could do it in captivity here, but then also, like, their ecology would make it, I think, fairly easy to go in situ and do it, because they kind of bury into sandbanks, and if you can find one, it's possible that you could go around it while it's buried and it wouldn't know you were there. But trying to find them in a social situation could be tough.
And how clear is the water? In
certain areas, it can be fairly clear, but it just depends what river system you're in. But they are in spring systems, but they're also in murky water.
Yeah.
Do you think?
Yeah, because I could definitely try with. No, I think that would change as well, because maybe they could communicate visually in some context, but then if they're not able to see each other, then they would produce other sounds, or a bit more. I don't know. They would change how the sounds, like the pitch of the sounds, based on the water. But I was asking about how clear the water is, because then if you have clear water, you could just put cameras in there and try playback experiments. So you don't need them to be necessarily in a social setup all the time. You can just experiment on them. See if they react to specific sounds and so on.
There are places here too, especially in Florida, where like South Florida, you can get a assemblage of turtles in like an urban pond, and they're naturally get more abundant there just from people fishing and discarding waste and things that they eat. But It would be interesting to put a hydrophone in there, and it wouldn't be really informative taxonomically, but just to see how much is going on in that one area. Yeah, that kind of thing. With the we'll start to kind of but with the cameras, were you recording what was going on while they were producing the sounds, or was this just for playback of the sound in particular?
No, I haven't done any playback experiments. I did that trying to associate behavior to sound. So I was trying to see what they were doing. Also because I wanted to discard the possibility that those sounds were just byproducts.
Okay.
So yeah,
Okay.
but it's a bit hard because, you know, the shells make it hard sometimes. I had two cameras, so like one in each side of the enclosure, trying to get at least some of it, but sometimes they stop very close to the camera and in a position where the shell covers the whole head of the turtle. So it can be tough. I have a few videos where you can see the turtle vocalizing, but not many. And considering that I recorded as many species, I would expect to get better videos actually.
Interesting. That's I can imagine sort of a challenge to. I mean, they're moving around a lot in the tank. Like how the tanks, I assume you had them in were fairly small, but still, was it kind of a problem with.
Well, it really depends on the species. Like I recorded. This is not in this paper we were talking about here, but also during my PhD, I recorded Barger. And I did recordings in a swimming pool where there were over 20 5-year-old juveniles. So quite large, a lot of animals in there, and shitty video. I think also because like turtles are very good at making the water dirty. And sometimes in a couple of hours, like you cannot see, like you have complete clear water, but you have to shut down the filtration system because it's noisy. And in a couple of hours, it's just impossible to see anything.
Right. Coming back to the Podocnemus too, were you seeing did you analyze them again or just use the previous recordings? Like, were you finding new sounds in them if you did analyze it, or was that not something you looked at?
Well, in this article, we didn't include the Podocnemus as one of the. I mean, we included in the database, but not in the list of species we recorded because we didn't. But I'm sorry, I have to specify this. I'm talking about Podocnemus expansa, which is the giant South American river turtle, and is the species that is quite well studied. We did include Podocnemus, but it was Sex tuberculata. It's a different species, also quite large. Similar ecology, similar behavior, and they make more or less similar sounds. But no, I did not record Podocnemus expansa.
Yeah,
I don't know if I answered your question.
No, it makes sense that you would just have the previous recordings and use that. I mean, it sounds like the new ones that you recorded took up enough time. So sort of, I guess, kind of rounding out this portion of the discussion, what are the next steps for this? And I guess what's next?
I'm interested in a bunch of different but also related topics on turtle acoustic communication. So one of the things that I also investigated in my PhD, and I'm about to submit the paper for publication, is on acoustic communication and synchronous behavior of hatchlings. So we know that many turtles produce sounds from within the eggs in a clutch, and we are not completely sure, but there are some suggestions that the hatchlings use those sounds to synchronize the hatch and the nest. What is the word? Coming out of the nest.
Yeah.
And we don't really know, and there were a few studies trying to understand this. One of them was published in 2022 as well, last year, on the common snapping turtle by a group from Canada, which is, in my opinion, the best research on this specific topic. And they do playback experiments with the eggs, and they try to understand if they are using those sounds to synchronize hatch. They say they didn't find any answers. They do not respond to the sounds that they were playing to the eggs. But they also suggest that maybe it's more complex than what they expected, and new research should be done. And I did record a lot of different clutches from different species to check which ones are producing sounds and the ones they are not, and so on. So this is one of the topics. And although I do have one interesting paper to publish, I think this is still very preliminary, and I really think it would be cool to keep going that direction. And another thing I'm interested in doing is to understand a bit more about how complex the acoustic repertoire of one species can be. So now I'm going to work together with Camila Ferrara, this person in Brazil. And we're going to focus my next research. I recently got news that I have being granted a postdoc position. So I'm going to do this research on the South American river turtle, Podocnemis expansa, in the Amazon with Camila, and we're going to basically study different populations and see if they are producing different sounds, if they have different languages, things like this. And there are many smaller projects inside that one, but I guess we can talk about this in a couple of years when it's published.
Yeah, that's cool. And I can see, I mean, that's an interesting topic in itself. Like I think you've got some experience sort of in the genetic realm of work, and I like something like that you could easily link to even figuring out kind of the GWAS kind of thing, and figuring out genes that are working on and how the evolution at the genetic level is producing different sounds. And like, I don't know if that's something you have planned, but that just comes to mind initially for me.
No, yeah, you're in the right path, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Well, so the last sort of thing in this area too would be we've sort of discussed how not wide open, but how novel this whole area is. And it's not like it's almost sort of misleading to think that the only question that exists here is, are turtles producing sound and communication? But it's so much more of a complicated, I mean, there's so many different opportunities for research here that I think a lot of people, this could be a whole new sort of field. And I think that's kind of what it is. Right.
Yeah,
so,
no, I agree 100%. There's so much to learn.
So that,
and I think it could be. Sorry, you go ahead.
No, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So I just think that many different fields of research can profit from turtles as models in bioacoustics. We can learn about ecology, conservation, evolution. There's so much to do, and nowadays, if you check on other groups of animals like birds and mammals, they are much better studied. We have developed as a scientific community a lot of different new techniques and technologies that can be used, and they are available already. And this is a new role for us, because we didn't know the turtles make sounds, or that many sounds at least. So now we can use all those things that are available and just discover a bunch more about these animals. And for example, there are so many turtles that are highly endangered. We cannot, like, every once in a while, someone says, "Oh, I found this species that has been missing for this many years. We only knew of 2 that are in captivity, but we found another one," and so on. And there are new methods that are on bioacoustics that we could use to, for example, trace these animals. So we could use, there's a new type of recorder that is quite cheap, actually. You can buy, it's like a bulk buy. You buy many of them when they produce them. It's called Audio Moth. I don't know if you ever heard of it. And now they have a version for underwater recording. The quality is not that high, but if you already know the repertoire of the species, you can just set up in the wild, and it keeps recording for months, and you can associate it to some sort of artificial intelligence or machine learning to identify those sounds of interest and give you an alarm, like there is this animal here. We have positive confirmation of the presence of the animal. And then you can do that for endangered species. You can do that for common species. You can do that for example, when you said that you want to record that place where they feed the turtles, and there are many species there, you could use this to actually get to know what are the species that are there without having to catch them or anything. But of course, to do that, we need to compile a lot of information about their acoustic repertoire. We need a lot of sounds. So I think it's not only important that people do research on turtle bioacoustics, but also that they make the sounds that they record available to the scientific community. Otherwise, like, we are not going to improve our knowledge that quickly. So we should collaborate on this.
It's almost like it could be useful to create some kind of like universal database for this, where people can easily upload their recordings.
There are many available. It's just that no one records turtles, so you don't get that information.
Right. That's the whole artificial intelligence sort of like that's something that's been interesting to me, is like implementing that. I could see definitely helping with this. It's almost like it's like e-acoustics, like eDNA, but sort of a e-acoustics approach to things. Yeah,
and it's also much cheaper, right? Like you don't need to have the whole equipment and sequence the DNA in the water and so on. It's easier.
Yeah, right. Well, and sort of one follow-up to that would be, for someone that's interested in this, like, what do you think are some fruitful areas or research questions that need to get tackled in this area?
Well, at this stage, I think we just need to know the sounds that they make at first. Like, we have to record them as much as we can. So I think would be, especially if you're in the beginning of your academic career, or you're just interested in these animals and you don't have a goal to publish high impact all the time, because this is something annoying about academia as well. I would suggest people to just try to describe a repertoire of one species. So, like, get as many individuals as you can, put them in different situations, in different combinations, record them and describe the repertoire. Make this data set available. And we should do that for many species, and then we can start making new questions. But there are also other questions that I think would be more or less easy to answer with, I don't know, a couple of species. Like, for example, we could choose one lineage, like mud turtles or map turtles, and then record 5 different species, describe the repertoire of those 5 species, and then try to see if there is a way to tell them apart, and if there is some sort of character in the sound that is diagnostic, and if that is linked to the evolutionary tree of life of that lineage, for example. So then you can tell, oh, okay, this has an evolutionary trace or not. Then you can go to ecology. So you can do research like record, we were saying before, record the same species in different areas where it exists. So ponds, lakes, rivers, see if the vocal behavior changes in those places. Yeah, I guess a lot of things.
Yeah,
have you noticed? Sorry, Michael, what do you want to say?
Yeah, go ahead, Kat. No, go.
Have Have you noticed anything like with regards to like the vigor or health of a population and the degree and or frequency of their vocalizations?
That's a good question. I actually don't know if I saw like an actual pattern there, but I was interested in that, and I would expect. I think it's like common sense to think that the bigger the number of animals, the bigger the number of vocalizations you're going to get. But there were several situations where I had a bunch of animals together and very, very few sounds. But when I have only two, then they are communicating all the time. And one pattern that, in this case, this is clear to me, is that they do communicate more if they are in touch for the first time. So like if you go, like I told you about the Badger swimming pool, those animals were together since they were hatchlings. And I recorded the pool for many hours and they didn't produce many sounds. But once I put the adults together, the adults were like one male, one female, and they were in separate pools. They know each other, but they only meet every once in a while for breeding. When I put them together, they started immediately to produce several different sounds. And that happens in many species, like red-foot tortoises, for example. I have seen them meeting for the first time, and they make those movements with their heads like this, and they make some very funny sounds that sound a bit like a chicken, I guess. And they don't do that after they've been together for long. So yeah, I guess there's a lot of meaning to that. There's a social component.
Yeah, I think it's really understated how social turtles can be. I mean, like, a lot of people really underestimate how they have. I was talking to Michael about this, like, right before we started recording, just about, like, how many, like, especially in map turtles and terrapins, there are just so many little quirky social interactions that they have with each other, and I don't know really how to phrase it.
It was interesting what you were saying too about kind of the maternal, like you see a lot of them, yeah.
I've noticed so I live in Delaware, which is a state that has a really high density of northern diamondback terrapins, and I've noticed mainly here that they tend to have more of a matriarchal structure, whereas I'll go out and I will be taking my pictures or just observing the terrapins. I'll notice that the females will often have several males following her around at once, and it's just all the time. So wherever I find a female, you're guaranteed to find 2 or 3 males following behind them. And it was the same with northern map turtles. When I went up to New Jersey last year, they tend to follow the northern map turtles around as well. Not to as great of an extent, but still.
Yeah, those are very cool observations. I think this is what it's all about. Yeah, you have to try to find patterns and describe that to everyone. I don't know. Yeah. Do you guys have? Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just saying this whole episode has kind of made me wonder what secret vocalizations might be taking place now between the diamondback terrapins and the little groups of them, and that may be something I would be interested in checking out with the audio moth that you've previously mentioned.
You should definitely do that. No one ever recorded that species. Do you guys have any pet turtles?
Yeah, I have a redfoot and a red-eared slider.
So not like you don't have like a small population in one tank or anything like that. Yeah, so maybe you're not able to observe that, but I have seen in many cases, many different species of turtles, they would stop one in front of each other, and they would like if they are measuring each other, and they're they stop and they're looking in each other's eyes, and sometimes they have a throat movement, and you hear nothing because they are underwater, and there's a glass in between you and the turtles, but I'm pretty sure that they are vocalizing at exactly that moment. And I was already thinking that when I started my research, and after I did a lot of recordings with the cameras in the tanks, I saw that happening, like that happened many times. So I'm sure that I mean, this is a bit of a stretch, but I'm sure that the turtles you have and the turtles that you're interested in studying are making sounds as well. Just go there and try.
It's something too, like hybrid turtles. Kind of curious, like how does it change if you've got hybrids, that sort of thing? And
that's a very good question, and domestic ones as well. I mean, the term domestic is a bit broad and it's sometimes hard to define. But especially in the U.S., there are so many turtles that you can get access to. Like you can buy in shops. There are like morphs, and I don't know what else you can find there. But those I would classify them as more or less domesticated, and I wonder if they would produce different sounds from the ones in the wild as well. That would be something cool to check.
Yeah, no, that would be. I think sort of we can sort of transition into something something else that you looked at, which is sort of this was interesting. I didn't realize this until going back through some of your work. But you've also done work with sort of the evolution of productive parameters in terms of egg size and optimal egg size theory, that sort of thing. And so you use some interesting methodologies there. But I just one thing that really stood out to me in that paper that you read was you used this method to look at sort of convergence of different sort of reproductive associations over time in kind of a phylogenetic framework. Maybe you could just talk about that a little bit, because I think we take it for granted, right? So yeah, if you could just expand on that.
So basically, to put it in simple words, there is a tendency for turtles that lay a bunch of eggs, so large clutches, to have proportionally smaller eggs that are much rounder. And the species that lay 1 to 4 eggs, for example, they tend to be very elongated and much larger in comparison to the body size of the turtle. And this is a pattern you can see in many different lineages. Actually, you can see both of those patterns within all turtle lineages, basically. Not all of them, but many of them. And there is this theory that is called the optimum egg size theory that implies that there is a specific size of egg in correlation to the clutch and the body size of the animal that is optimal to that species. And basically we tested that, looking at, not that this has never been tested before, but only in specific lineages of turtles and also other groups of animals like birds. And what we did is that we compiled information for not every species of turtle, but most of them. We have data for every genus. And we checked this in a broad phylogenetic perspective of turtles, and yeah, we just confirmed what the theory says. And the methods that we use in this paper are, I mean, you have to try to have a statistical approach sometimes and try to explain things in number. I think many of the journals like that as well. But in a way, I think that what we show with this statistical approach is basically just a confirmation of what we can observe when we have the tree and we plot the information in the tree, and you see that those things change within lineages. So you can already infer that this is a convergent trait in turtles. And different lineages will go to different directions, but it's really random. I think there's no a pattern of of like what made the different groups of turtles go to different directions in the reproductive, let's say, framework. Yeah, but there are some characteristics in the places where they live, for example. So like tropical turtles tend to produce more eggs, things like this. We try to explain those patterns with a bit of turtle ecology, but it's a lot of inferences, I guess. But the cool thing about this paper is that we can actually show how these characteristics are distributed among all turtles.
Right. And with the convergence and that, like the analysis you did where you looked at how different types, I think you split up into like 6 different groups. So Pleridiars and Cryptodiars each had 3 different kind of associations in terms of clutch size. And then you use some analytical methods to figure out over time how those things have converged. Do you think that can you use that to predict how contemporary distributions of those clutch size patterns will change with time? Or is that more something that you're just tracing it back through time, that you see that it's come to this point now and that it's changed in a certain way?
Well, that's a good question, but I think in the end it's a philosophical question more than anything. I think different people would probably say different things to that question. My opinion is that this is a solid no. And my point of view is that like every evolutionary change that happened throughout the history of those lineages can be considered like a historical event. So basically, every single time that something happened, it happened because of specific contexts, and therefore they're not necessarily comparable. So although now that we have a broad view of things and like we have a lot of information in the long term for different lineages, we could run a statistical analysis in a broad sense and then try to infer future patterns. Philosophically, I think this is a mistake, because in the future, the context will be different from the context of the past. And therefore, although some things might look the same, they are not the same. So it's really possible in that sense to predict the future. That's how I see it, at least. I don't know if I make myself clear here.
I mean, the sort of the driver of sort of how natural selection works and how those changes happen is the environment, and trying to predict what the environment's going to be like is hard. I think that sort of encapsulates the point. It's like we can't know. Is that sort of accurate? Yeah.
That's more or less what I think. Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of people do this kind of research, though. A lot of people would disagree with me.
Yeah, I mean, it's the modeling aspect. I with some of the pond turtle stuff I was doing, we're now trying to do these. They're models based on the data that we collected, but it's there's some like level of predictive capacity. We're trying to like how are the I've looked at red slider and western pond turtle interactions and basking dynamics, and we're trying to figure out, is there some way we can extrapolate out in like 50 years how the distributions are going to change? And it's just that sort of thing becomes challenging. It's so theoretical that it's almost like, how well does it really match reality? But that's sort of something else and future discussion, I guess. But sort of to wrap things up here, for someone that's looking to get into in trying to make turtle and tortoise work a career, what's some advice that you would have? And maybe for someone that's currently in grad school or trying to get a degree, what's some advice you would have?
I think the most important thing is to be passionate. It is hard, it is competitive, but you're gonna thrive if you're really passionate about this. It's just becomes naturally, I guess. You're gonna find other people who are also in love about the topic, and they're gonna they're going to support you, they're going to help you out, and you're just going to keep going because you really want to learn, you really want to know. I think this, the wish to discover is a very powerful thing. And if you're not that interested, maybe you should look for something else and have it as a hobby. But yeah, if you're passionate, I'm sure it's going to work out. And of course, try to contact different people. Try to, get out of your bubble. Talk to people elsewhere. Talk to people in other countries. Go in the wild, see the animals, observe things, read a lot. That's good.
That's we'll certainly take that advice to heart. And for listeners,
that's really good. That's really good advice. I like that.
Good.
and it's good. I think you can't really teach passion. It seems like something that for people that I'm around and have been around, it's like a lot of people try to teach their kids passion and instill that, but it's something that just has to come naturally. It's a complicated thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, okay. I mean, I think that's sort of, unless there's anything else you want to add, Gabriel, we can sort of wrap things up. But
well, I don't know. Maybe you could. I don't know if this is possible. Maybe you could make my email available. So if someone is interested in doing this kind of research, I just want to help out as much as I can and give tips and I don't know, just support people. I really wish more people start doing this kind of research. So I'm here to help however I can.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, we can definitely do that. We will link the paper and also the recordings as well. I'll do that once this airs in a bit. But we also, so at the end, I forgot to mention this, but we like to do like a little turtle trivia round just for fun and to just, if you've got any like obscure turtle facts, just to sort of throw them around with each other. So we can do this anyway. We can ask you questions. You can ask us questions. Normally I like to tell people in advance so they can come up with something, but it just slipped my mind this time. But I don't know if you've got some random turtle facts that you want to throw at us, or we can throw some at you. Just a sort of a fun way to.
Did you know that I struggle a bit with popular names? I think it's the Chinese big head turtle.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know which one?
Platysternon megacephalum.
Exactly, that's right. Did you know that those are known to be... Actually, this was the first turtle, water turtle, to be described as being vocal by a very ancient Chinese book that is considered like a very important cultural thing in China. I won't be able to tell you the name of the book now, though. And this species is also known to climb trees.
Yeah, I've heard that. They're really good climbers. They also have that really cool prehensile tail.
Yeah, that's an insane animal. Insane. But I have seen photos of other turtle species climbing trees as well. There's one from, I don't remember the species, but it was some sort of mud turtle in the US. Holding a tree and like a meter up.
Oh yeah, Kinosternids, they will climb trees to bask. I've had many musk turtles fall out of trees and surprise me while herping.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I've had similar experience with. I was working in Belize last summer at the Bee Free station out there. And we were doing, it's actually, we weren't there for the dermatomes, which is kind of funny because most people go for that. We were there to sort of look at the assemblage of all the 7 or 8 other species that are there. And we had white-lipped mud turtles. That's the most common one that we encounter there. And one of them, we worked in sort of this, it's like a hut. And it was double screened. So there was an outer screen and an inner screen. And one of the white-lipped mud turtles we had, In the process of taking it back and waiting to process it, this thing escaped and made it about 10 feet to the screen and then ascended about 5 feet into the screen. So it wasn't like it was sandwiched between two layers of mesh. So it was easy enough for it to get up with kind of the force of the two different screens on it. But it was still crazy because we were looking for this thing for like an hour. And finally, someone else comes from the group, and within 30 seconds, he found it. And the reason we couldn't see it is because it was sort of behind a shirt. They had like the merchandise in there. And so it had wedged its way 5 feet up behind a shirt, and he had flipped the shirt and saw this thing there. And it was wild to see that. But yeah, they climb,
Yeah. I have seen many videos of common snapping turtles climbing fences as well. They're wild.
Yeah, that's those ones too. And the intermediate musk turtles is the recently described musk turtle. They'll be like, I've got some videos I'm gonna put out on like social media soon of them. I mean, they're like 10 feet up in the tree, and like we were talking about beforehand, they're basking, and it's not sunny out. It's shaded. A lot of these places are like 10 feet up on branches, and it's fairly cold actually. So I don't know. There's got to be some more significance to that.
But maybe they are trying to avoid the warm water. This is why turtles bask at night, based on this new paper that came out I was telling you about before from Dawn. So
Yeah,
they're inversely basking, I think.
Right. It needs a different term.
I saw a video this morning. I just pulled it up now on my phone just to make sure. And it appears to be a common snapping turtle climbing up a telephone pole, and it's like really up towards the top.
That's insane.
I know. I don't know how they end up doing that. They're really surprising climbers for how they're built.
I have seen while doing my recordings, I have seen a common snapping turtle that was put in a like those like container boxes, like the black one that is very thick and like very strong plastic.
Yeah.
It was put inside of one of those, and it simply broke the plastic in half and came through the box.
Wow.
Out of it. It's insane. This is a powerful animal.
Well, they have insanely powerful forearms. I mean, there was one time Jack and I were working with I think it was 19 inches in width, 18 inches in carapace length snapping turtle that we caught up in northern Delaware. And it had actually, in its attempts to snap at us, it had pierced the webbing of its own front forelimbs with its back claws. Super, super strong animals.
Yeah.
And I mean, just like the feeding videos I've seen, either natural predation with larger mammals like beavers and Canada, I've seen snapping turtles. It's insane how strong they are to be able to subdue an animal like a beaver.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen some videos as well. It's cool animal.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I think we can sort of wrap things up here. But Gabriel, thank you so much for coming on today and telling us more about your work. It's been awesome. And
I have two questions before you go.
Whoa. Okay.
I have two questions.
All right. Yeah.
So, first, you mentioned the scientific utility of establishing like a public database of all these turtle sounds, right? I'm wondering if you think there's also a potential for abuse, because supposedly if they you can correct me if I'm thinking about this wrong, but if like a commercial trapper were to find the audio file for a turtle that's saying like let's smash, they could play that audio file in the water and then get all the turtles to come up with their traps or something like that. Yeah.
Well, I guess you can use things in the bad way in every situation, right? Like I don't know, but I don't know if that would work. Then you are inferring that they will respond to playback, which I don't know if it's the case. I don't know if it's the case. Yeah. But we should definitely try.
Yeah. Before you go, is it possible for you to play like just a sound recording of a turtle sound?
I cannot do that through my phone.
So I can access the supplementary material. You said that it was in there.
I can send you a link that makes it easier.
Sure, yeah. If you want to do that, because we could pull one up right now, and if you've got a whole group of them, we could play some and see it. But yeah, just send that to me. We can get that up. But I just gotta say, like, we have like the dynamic, the social dynamic's a bit weird because we're online. But Ken, he doesn't talk much, but he's always got these good questions. He's got to talk a little bit more over here.
His thinking more.
That's what it is. Yeah. No. That is really interesting. That whole aspect, like how could it be abused, right?
Oh yeah, no, but for sure, that's something to think about. I guess you're right. We are trying to make conservation, and sometimes we can make things worse, right? It should be careful. So, all right, sounds cool. Thank you for having me. It was pretty cool talk.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, that was awesome.
All right. Guess I'll see you around. Are you going to the TSA meeting this year? The symposium.
I will be there. Yeah. I don't know about the other guys.
I'm still on the fence.
All right. Okay.
I'll make sure Ken comes. I'm pretty sure I can get on.
I'm actually not coming this year, but I plan on going next year.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, we'll cross paths down the line for sure.
Yeah.
It'd be fun to talk once you started that Podak Nemus work and yeah. Cool.
Yeah. Hopefully I have something to show. Okay.
All right. Sweet. Thanks,
cheers,
Gabriel,
guys.
This has been episode 37.
See ya.
We'll see you later.